The mining laser died with a pathetic whimper, leaving silence in the asteroid field where screams had echoed moments before. Tom Rivers floated in his damaged EVA suit, watching the expanding cloud of debris that had once been mining platform. 43 humans had been working that shift. Now, there were 43 new reasons why the Galactic Council considered his species expendable. "Control, this is Salvage Team Alpha," Tom spoke into his comm unit, his voice steady despite the rage building in his chest. "Platform 7 is gone. Total loss." The reply came in the bored tone of a Vraxian dispatcher. "Understood, human. Collect any valuable materials and return to base. The insurance payout will cover replacement workers. Not people. Not beings with families and dreams. Workers. Maya cross-piloted their salvage ship closer to the debris field, her movements precise despite the tremor in her hands. She had trained 3 of the dead miners herself, taught them how to read the asteroid composition scanners. Good people who deserve better than being vaporized because the Council refused to spend credits on proper safety equipment. "Any survivors?" Rick Stone asked from the navigation console, though they all knew the answer. The explosion had been too massive, too sudden. The mining platform's emergency systems had been disabled months ago to save on maintenance costs. "None," Beth Gray reported from her medical station. Her scanner showed no life signs among the wreckage. The blast signature indicates a core containment failure. Those safety warnings we filed last month were accurate. Tom cursed under his breath. Every human supervisor in the Outer Rim had filed the same reports about dangerous working conditions. Every report had been marked as noted but not actionable by Council oversight. The dominant species considered human concerns about safety to be unnecessary complaints from inferior beings, who should be grateful for any work at all. The persistence drifted through the asteroid field like a metal coffin, collecting chunks of refined ore that would make some Council corporation rich while human families mourned their dead. Tom watched his crew work with mechanical efficiency, their faces blank masks hiding years of accumulated fury. They had learned long ago that showing emotion only brought punishment. "Incoming transmission from Council Command," Maya announced, her voice tight with controlled anger. The holographic image of Counselor Vorth materialized on their bridge, his insectoid features twisted in what passed for a smile among the Krellin species. His compound eyes glittered with cruel amusement as he delivered his message. "Human salvage teams are to report to the Aldery sector immediately. New mining quotas have been established, and your species will meet them regardless of casualties. The recent incident at Platform 7 demonstrates that humans require closer supervision to prevent future accidents." Tom felt something cold settle in his stomach. The Aldery sector was a death trap, filled with unstable asteroids and radiation, fields that would kill human workers in weeks. But the Council had made their decision, and humans had no voice in the government that controlled their lives. "Furthermore," Vorth continued, "all human colonies are ordered to surrender 20% of their children aged 12 to 16 for educational relocation. The Aldery Empire requires workers with human adaptability for their expansion projects. Compliance is mandatory." The transmission ended, leaving the crew of the Persistence staring at empty space. Educational relocation was a lie? Everyone knew the Aldery used child laborers in their toxic chemical plants, working them until they died and then requesting more. But the Council had classified humans as a renewable resource, and renewable resources could be harvested as needed. "My daughter is 13, Rick whispered, his face pale. "She lives on New Terra Colony." Beth turned away from her console, unable to hide her tears. "This has to stop. We can't keep watching our people die while the Council grows fat on our suffering." Mayao's hands tightened on the flight controls. "What choice do we have?" "They have. The warships, the weapons, the power, we're just humans." Tom stared out at the debris field where 43 people had died for Council profits. Something was changing inside him, a shift from despair to cold determination. He had spent 30 years watching his species be ground down by systematic oppression, accepting that humans were powerless against the might of 12 dominant species, but Power was not just about weapons and warships. It was about will, about refusing to accept the unacceptable. The Council saw humans as weak because they measured strength only in terms of brute force and political influence. They had never considered what might happen if humanity stopped trying to appease their oppressors and started planning to resist them. "Set course for New Terra," Tom ordered. "We're going to deliver those supplies," the Council ordered. "But sir," Rick protested, "the blockade ships will destroy us if we try to run medical aid to the colony." "Who said anything about medical aid?" Tom smiled for the first time in months, though there was no warmth in the expression. "We're delivering surveillance equipment just like our orders specify." The fact that some of those packages might contain emergency medical supplies and communication gear is simply a coincidence. Maya looked at him with new understanding. "You're talking about breaking Council regulations. They'll execute us if we're caught. They're already killing us," Tom replied. "The difference is whether we die on our knees or standing up." The Persistence turned toward New Terra, carrying a crew that had finally decided they had nothing left to lose. Behind them, the wreckage of Mining Platform 7 drifted through space, a monument to Council indifference and human suffering. But something had changed in that moment of decision, a transformation that would ripple across the galaxy in ways the Council could never imagine. The downtrodden had taken their first step toward becoming something far more dangerous, the determined. The alarm klaxons at Mining Station Omega 7 had been broken for 6 months, just like everything else the Council deemed unnecessary for human operations. Jim Hall heard the rumbling through the station's hull before his instruments registered the danger. But by then it was already too late to evacuate the deep shafts. Section 7's support struts were failing, the metal screaming under stresses that proper maintenance could have prevented. Jim slammed his fist on the emergency lockdown button, sealing the blast doors to protect the workers in the upper levels. But 847 humans were trapped below in the collapsing mine. "Emergency teams to Section 7. He broadcast over the station's failing communication system. "All personnel evacuate immediately." This is not a drill. Counselor Vorth of the Krellin hegemony stood in the observation deck above the mine entrance, his compound eyes glittering with annoyance rather than concern. He had arrived for a routine inspection and found the humans once again disrupting his schedule with their complaints about safety protocols. "Supervisor Hall," Vorth's voice crackled through the comm system, "you will cease this disruption immediately and return the workers to their assigned duties. The production quota must be met." Jim stared at the readouts showing catastrophic structural failure throughout the deep sections. Gas pockets were rupturing, support columns were buckling, and the artificial gravity was fluctuating wildly. Sending people into that death trap would be murder. "Sir, the mine is collapsing. We need to evacuate everyone and seal the entrance until repairs can be made." "The Krellin hegemony does not recognize human authority over operational decisions," Vorth replied coldly. "You will comply with Council directives or face charges of insubordination." Through the reinforced windows of the control room, Jim could see his wife Anna in the evacuation staging area, her pregnant belly prominent even under the bulky mining suit. Their twin daughters, Emma and Kate, clung to her sides, their young faces pale with fear as the station shuddered around them. They had been visiting the station for Jim's birthday when the collapse began. "Counselor, please," Jim pleaded. "There are families down there, children. If we send them back into the mine, they'll die." "Then they will die fulfilling their purpose," Vorth stated with casual indifference. "Human breeding rates are sufficient to replace any losses. Production schedules are not." Jim felt something break inside his chest, a lifetime of deference and obedience shattering like cheap metal under stress. He looked at his family, at the terrified miners gathering in the staging area, at the readings that promised death for anyone who entered the compromised sections. No, the word hung in the recycled air of the control room like a physical presence. Vorth's antennae twitched with surprise, then anger. "What did you say, human?" "I said no." Jim turned to face the observation deck where the counselor stood. "I won't send these people to die for your quotas. The mine stays sealed until it's safe." Vorth's mandibles clicked together in what passed for laughter among his species. Security. Arrest Supervisor Hall for insubordination and terrorism. Execute him immediately as an example to the other workers. The Krellin guards moved with mechanical precision, their energy weapons already charging. Jim had time for one last look at Anna's face, one final moment to memorize his daughter's eyes, before the neural disruptor turned his nervous system into fire. He died standing between the council and his people, the last act of defiance by a man who had finally found something worth dying for. Vorth stepped over Jim's body and addressed the terrified crowd of miners. Let this demonstrate the consequences of disobedience. You will now return to your work assignments or face similar punishment. The humans looked at each other with expressions of shock and growing fury, but they had no weapons, no training, no hope of resistance against armed council forces. Slowly, reluctantly, they began moving toward the mine entrance in certain death. Anna Hall knelt beside her husband's body, her tears mixing with the coolant fluid leaking from the stations. Damaged systems. Her daughters whispered his name over and over, as if saying it enough times might bring him back. Around them, 847 human beings walked into a collapsing mine because a council member valued or more than lives. The explosion came 37 minutes later, a massive detonation that vaporized the deep sections and sent shockwaves through the station's superstructure. Emergency bulkheads sealed automatically, trapping the screams of the dying behind tons of twisted metal and fallen rock. When the dust settled, Omega-7 was silent except for the hiss of escaping atmosphere and the quiet sobbing of the survivors. Anna Hall held her daughters close and stared at the sealed mine entrance that had become a mass grave for nearly 1,000 human beings. Counselor Vorth filed his report that evening, classifying the incident as acceptable losses during industrial operations and recommending increased quotas to compensate for the temporary reduction in workforce. The fine levied against the mining company was less than the cost of the ore that had been lost in the collapse, but something else had been lost in the depths of Omega-7, something the council would not realize until it was far too late. The last vestiges of human patience had died with Jim Hall, buried under tons of rock and metal alongside the bodies of the innocent Dot in the days that followed. Encrypted messages began flowing through hidden communication networks, carrying news of the massacre to human communities across the galaxy. The messages were brief and factual, but they carried an emotional weight that threatened to tear apart the careful facade of human compliance. David Hall, Jim's 16-year-old son who had been away at technical school when his family died, received the news in a cramped dormitory on the industrial world of Kepler Prime. He read the message 3 times before the words sank in, and when they did, something cold and purposeful took root in his heart. His father had died trying to save people. His mother and sisters had died because a council member valued profits over lives. Nearly 1,000 human beings had been murdered for the crime of wanting to live. David encrypted his own message and sent it to contacts throughout the human diaspora. The words were simple, but they would change the course of galactic history. They killed them all. We can't let this stand. We won't let this stand. Dr. Emma Walsh adjusted her laboratory coat and smiled politely at the Althery guard who escorted her through the council research facility each morning. For 3 years, she had been the perfect example of human compliance, arriving early, working late, and never questioning the orders that sent her research to weapons manufacturers who would use it against her own species. But beneath her careful facade, Emma was building something that would shake the foundations of galactic civilization. Every scan she performed on alien biology, every genetic sequence she analyzed, every physiological weakness she documented was being copied to encrypted storage devices no larger than dust particles. The Council's arrogance was their greatest vulnerability. They saw humans as intellectually inferior, incapable of the complex thinking required for strategic planning or scientific innovation. This blindness allowed Emma to work freely in the most secure facilities in the galaxy, trusted with classified information because no one imagined a human could use it effectively. Sample analysis complete on Krellin neural pathways, Emma reported to her Aldery supervisor, transmitting the official data while simultaneously copying the real findings to her hidden network. The Krellin nervous system had a critical flaw that could be exploited with the right biochemical agent, but the supervisor would never read deeply enough to understand the implications. 3 sectors away, former Marine Colonel Ray Bennett was conducting safety inspections at human residential facilities, teaching basic maintenance skills to civilian workers. His lessons covered how to repair atmospheric processors, maintain gravity generators, and troubleshoot communication arrays. They also covered how to turn each of these systems into weapons with minimal modifications. A number, he told a group, of sanitation workers. The emergency protocols for these systems are standardized across all council facilities. If you understand how to maintain them, you understand how to disable them. The workers nodded and took careful notes ostensibly, learning how to keep their cramped living quarters functional. In reality, they were receiving training that would allow them to cripple entire space stations when the time came. Ray's network extended throughout the human population, a carefully structured cell system that compartmentalized information while maintaining operational coordination. Each cell knew only what it needed to know, making the organization virtually impossible to detect or destroy through conventional intelligence methods. Tech specialist Alex Moore worked in the deepest levels of the Council's communication infrastructure, maintaining the quantum relay networks that connected the galaxy's governments and military forces. His official duties required him to have access to transmission protocols, encryption keys, and routing algorithms that controlled interstellar communication. Primary relay maintenance complete, Alex logged in his daily report. All systems operating within normal parameters. The report was true but incomplete. Alex had spent months installing undetectable backdoors in the communication systems, creating pathways that would allow the human resistance to monitor council communications and broadcast their own messages when needed. The modifications were hidden within routine maintenance code, invisible to casual inspection. Maya Cross had parlayed her salvage experience into a position as the equipment specialist for the Council Defense Force, responsible for maintaining mining and construction equipment across multiple star systems. Her work took her to military installations, industrial facilities, and government complexes throughout Council space. Each site she visited was carefully mapped and analyzed. Security protocols, personnel rotations, structural weaknesses, and supply chains were all documented and transmitted to the growing resistance database. Her technical expertise allowed her to identify exactly how to disable or destroy any facility she encountered. Equipment manifest updated for Aldery sector. Command, Maya reported during her weekly briefing. All systems optimized for maximum efficiency. The efficiency improvements she recommended would also make the systems more vulnerable to sabotage, but her supervisors saw only increased productivity and cost savings. They praised her work and expanded her access to even more sensitive facilities. Beth Gray's medical training had led to a position in the Council Health Authority, where she was responsible for developing treatments for diseases affecting the dominant species. Her research into alien biology complemented Emma's work, providing detailed information about physiological vulnerabilities that could be exploited. More importantly, Beth was developing medical countermeasures to protect humans from the biological weapons the Council might use in retaliation. Her laboratory produced vaccines, treatments, and protective gear disguised as routine medical supplies and distributed throughout human communities. Quarterly health assessment shows declining mortality rates in human populations, Beth reported to her supervisors. Improved nutrition and medical care are having positive effects. The improved health was real, but it was also preparation. Healthier humans could better survive the hardships of armed resistance, and the medical infrastructure Beth was building would be crucial for treating casualties when the fighting began. Tom Rivers continued his salvage operations, but his routes now carried more than just recovered materials. Hidden compartments in his ship transported weapons, equipment, and personnel between resistance cells. His crew had grown from 4 to 40, officially registered as additional salvage specialists but actually serving as couriers and trainers. For the expanding network, salvage quota exceeded by 12% this quarter, Tom reported to Council Logistics. Request permission to expand operations to adjacent sectors. Permission was granted immediately, giving him access to even more strategic locations and transportation routes. The Council saw only increased productivity from their human workforce, never suspecting that the same efficiency was being used to build an organization dedicated to their destruction. The resistance grew slowly and carefully, avoiding the dramatic gestures that might attract attention. Instead of terrorist attacks or public demonstrations, they focused on infiltration, intelligence gathering, and strategic positioning. Every human with access to Council facilities became a potential asset. Every job assignment became an opportunity. For reconnaissance, Rick Stone's navigation skills had earned him a position planning shipping routes for Council commercial operations. His work required detailed knowledge of hyperspace lanes, military patrol patterns, and cargo schedules throughout the galaxy. This information was invaluable for planning coordinated strikes that could cripple the Council's ability to respond to multiple threats simultaneously. New routing protocols implemented for Sector 7 supply convoys, Rick logged in his official reports. Transit times reduced by 18%. The improved efficiency was genuine, but the new routes also created vulnerabilities that could be exploited to intercept critical supplies or strand Council forces in remote systems when the time came for action. 18 months after the massacre at Mining Station Omega 7, the human resistance had evolved from a scattered collection of angry individuals into a sophisticated intelligence network with assets throughout Council space. They had detailed plans for disabling critical infrastructure, disrupting military communications, and neutralizing key political figures. Most importantly, they had identified other oppressed species who might serve as allies in the coming conflict. The Krellans faced cultural extinction through forced assimilation, their ancient traditions being systematically erased by Council policy. The Turlings had been enslaved for generations, their homeworld strip-mined, and their people treated as disposable labor. Contact with these groups was established through careful intermediaries, building relationships based on shared suffering rather than grand promises. The humans offered practical assistance, sharing intelligence and resources without demanding immediate commitment to armed resistance. But the most crucial element of the resistance was something the Council could never have anticipated: absolute unity of purpose among the human population. The massacre at Omega 7 had crystallized decades of accumulated grievances into a single, burning desire for justice. Every human in the galaxy understood that they faced extinction if they remained passive. The Council's policies were designed to gradually reduce human population through dangerous work assignments, medical neglect, and systematic oppression. Resistance was not just rebellion, it was survival. The network operated with perfect security, because every participant shared the same goal and understood the consequences of failure. There were no informants, no defectors, no security breaches that might reveal the scope of what was being planned. The Council continued to see only what they expected to see: compliant humans performing their assigned duties with mechanical efficiency. They never imagined that this same efficiency was being turned against them, that every day of apparent cooperation was actually a day of preparation for total war. The silent preparation was nearly complete. Phil Carter was mopping the floors of the Council Assembly Hall when the signal reached his neural implant at exactly 14:27 Galactic Standard Time. The message was simple: remember Mining Station Omega 7, remember the children, remember our worth. He stopped mopping and walked calmly to the gravity control room, where he had spent months installing carefully hidden modifications during routine maintenance calls. The counselors were in session 3 levels above, debating new regulations that would further restrict human rights and expand forced labor quotas. Phil activated the charges he had placed in the gravity generators 6 months earlier, then sealed the control room and sent his final message to the resistance network. Council assembly neutralized. Estimate 12 minutes before emergency power restores partial gravity. Proceed with Phase 2. 3 levels up, chaos erupted. As the artificial gravity failed, and 200 of the galaxy's most powerful political figures found themselves floating helplessly in the assembly chamber. Emergency protocols sealed the exits automatically, trapping them in weightless panic while their guards struggled to maintain control. The timing was perfect. At that exact moment, Security Chief Lisa Webb was uploading every classified file in the Council Intelligence database to public broadcast networks throughout the galaxy. Military secrets, diplomatic communications, financial records, and classified research data flooded the galactic internet in an unstoppable torrent of information. Council database archive complete, Lisa transmitted to her contact Alex Moore. All security protocols disabled. Public access confirmed on 47,000 files. The revelations were devastating. The galaxy learned about secret weapons, programs, illegal genetic experiments, and systematic genocide campaigns against dozens of species. Financial records showed corruption on an unimaginable scale, with council members embezzling resources meant for humanitarian aid and using them to fund private armies. But the most damaging information was the detailed documentation of human suffering. Every mining accident, every forced labor camp, every child taken for educational relocation was meticulously recorded in files that showed the Council's complete indifference to human life. In the Council dining facility, Cook Maria Santos added the final ingredient to the water purification system. The bioweapon she had spent months developing was specifically designed to target the genetic markers of the 3 dominant Council species. It would not kill them, but it would incapacitate them for weeks with a debilitating neurological condition. Kitchen. Duties complete, Maria reported. Special menu will be available in approximately 30 minutes. The pathogen spread through the facility's water system with ruthless efficiency, reaching every major Council installation within hours. Leaders who had ordered the deaths of millions found themselves unable to coordinate their responses as their nervous systems shut down in carefully controlled stages. Tom Rivers commanded a fleet of 30 ships, all officially registered as salvage vessels but actually heavily armed warships disguised with mining equipment and civilian markings. They had spent months positioning themselves around the Aldery blockade of New Terra, waiting for this moment. All ships, this is Admiral Rivers, he broadcast on the Resistance frequency. Operation Liberation is now active. Engage designated targets and protect the civilians. The battle for New Terra lasted exactly 17 minutes. The Aldery blockade force had been designed to intimidate defenseless colonists, not fight a coordinated naval engagement against opponents who knew their exact positions, weapon capabilities, and defensive weaknesses. Maya Cross had sabotaged the Aldery ships, targeting systems months earlier during a routine maintenance inspection, and their weapons could not lock onto the attacking human vessels. Their communications were jammed by Alex Moore's backdoors in the galactic network, preventing them from calling for reinforcements or coordinating their defense. When the last Aldery warship surrendered, Tom opened communication channels to every world in the sector. Instead of threats or demands for submission, he broadcast footage of human medical teams delivering supplies to the liberated colonies. "This is Admiral Rivers of the Terran Commonwealth Navy," he announced. "We are not conquerors. We are liberators. Any species that wishes to join us in building a better galaxy is welcome. Any species that chooses to continue the old ways of oppression will face the consequences." Dr. Emma Walsh's biological weapons were being deployed simultaneously across 12 star systems, but not as instruments of mass destruction. The pathogens she had designed were precisely targeted to affect only the neural pathways responsible for aggression and dominance. Behavior in the 3 major Council species, Krellan military commanders found themselves physically unable to give orders that would result in unnecessary casualties. Aldery politicians discovered they had lost the capacity for the ruthless calculation that had built their empire. Vraxian corporate leaders became incapable of making decisions that prioritized profits over the welfare of their workers. Phase 3 biological deployment complete, Emma reported from her laboratory on the Council homeworld. Target populations are experiencing temporary neurological modification. Aggressive behavior patterns disrupted without permanent damage. The weapons were designed to be temporary, lasting only long enough to prevent violent retaliation while the power structure of galactic civilization was reorganized. Emma had refused to create anything that would cause permanent harm, even to her enemies. Colonel Ray Bennett led assault teams that struck military installations throughout Council space. But their missions were not focused on destruction. Instead, they were liberating prisoners, freeing slave populations, and capturing Council officials who had committed crimes against sentient beings. Detention Center Alpha 7 secured, Ray transmitted after leading a raid that freed 3,000 human children from an Aldery labor camp. Prisoners are receiving medical attention and transport to safe zones. Council overseer in custody for trial. Beth Gray's medical corps was already treating the freed prisoners, providing health care that many had never received in their entire lives. Her field hospitals were equipped with supplies that had been secretly accumulated over months of resistance. Preparation. Rick Stone coordinated the transportation network that moved refugees to safety while simultaneously preventing Council forces from responding effectively. His knowledge of hyperspace routes allowed him to create corridors of safe passage while blocking enemy reinforcements from reaching critical battle zones. The coordinated attack unfolded with precision that left the galaxy reeling. This was not a rebellion or revolution in any traditional sense. It was the systematic dismantling of an oppressive political structure by people who had spent years studying its weaknesses and preparing for this moment. Within 72 hours, the 12 species Council had been reduced to 7 functioning governments. The Aldery Empire surrendered when their homeworld's entire technological infrastructure went offline. Victims of the sabotage programs Alex Moore had installed in their systems, the Krellin, hegemony's military command structure collapsed when every ranking officer simultaneously developed the neurological condition that made them incapable of ordering attacks on civilian populations. Their ground forces found themselves literally unable to follow orders that would cause unnecessary suffering. The Vraxian corporate state suffered complete economic collapse when their financial networks were exposed as massive fraud schemes that had been stealing resources from client species for centuries. Their corporate executives were arrested by their own security forces, who had been exposed to Emma's behavioral modification agents throughout the galaxy. Oppressed species watched in amazement as their oppressors fell to a coordinated campaign that combined military precision with moral purpose. The humans had not simply conquered their enemies. They had transformed them, removing their capacity for cruelty while leaving their ability to contribute to society intact. But perhaps most importantly, humanity had proven that no oppression was permanent, no empire was invincible, and no people were inherently lesser than any other. They had shown the galaxy that freedom was not a gift to be granted by the powerful, but a right to be claimed by the determined. The day everything changed was ending, but the galaxy it left behind would never be the same. 5 years after the day humanity snapped, Admiral Tom Rivers stood before the Galactic Assembly as representatives from 67 species listened to his annual address on the state of the Commonwealth. The Great Hall had been rebuilt after the liberation, designed without elevated platforms or positions of dominance that might suggest one species was superior to another. We gather today not as rulers and subjects, but as equals sharing a common destiny. Tom began, his words translated simultaneously into dozens of languages. The Terran Commonwealth exists not to replace the old tyranny with a new one, but to ensure that no being ever again faces extinction simply for being different. In the audience, former enemies sat alongside former victims, their faces reflecting the complex emotions of a galaxy still learning to define itself without oppression. The Aldery delegation included refugees from their own empire's slave camps, working together to build something better than either had known before. Dr. Emma Walsh approached the podium next, her report on the ongoing rehabilitation programs drawing careful attention from every species present. The biological weapons she had deployed during the liberation had been designed to be temporary, but their effects had created permanent changes in how the former council species approached conflict and governance. Neurological modification treatments are proceeding ahead of schedule, Emma reported. Former council leaders are demonstrating remarkable adaptation to cooperative decision-making processes. Aggression-based leadership patterns have been successfully replaced with collaborative approaches in 93% of cases. The transformation had not been forced upon unwilling subjects. The modified council species had retained their free will and cognitive abilities, but found themselves physically incapable of the casual cruelty that had characterized their previous governments. Many reported feeling relief at being freed from the psychological burdens of maintaining oppressive systems. Maya Cross presented the industrial reconstruction statistics that showed how quickly the galaxy was adapting to its new economic model. Without the artificial scarcity created by council resource hoarding, production efficiency had increased by 400%, while working conditions improved dramatically across all species. Mining operations now maintain zero casualty records for 18 consecutive months, Maya announced. Worker satisfaction indices have reached historic highs, and productivity continues to exceed all projections. The irony was not lost on anyone present. The same humans who had been dismissed as inferior workers were now managing the most efficient industrial operations in galactic history. Their success came not from better technology or resources, but from treating workers as valuable beings rather than disposable tools. Beth Gray's medical report documented the elimination of diseases that had plagued the galaxy for millennia, conditions that the Council had maintained as methods of population control among subject species. Her research teams now included doctors from every known civilization, working together to solve problems that had been ignored when they only affected the powerless. Life expectancy has increased an average of 37% across all Commonwealth worlds, Beth reported. Genetic disorders previously classified as incurable have been eliminated through collaborative research programs. Medical care is now available to all beings regardless of species, economic status, or political affiliation. The medical advances were possible because human researchers had shared Dr. Emma's xenobiological data freely, breaking down the barriers that had prevented effective cooperation between species. Knowledge that had been hoarded by the Council for military applications was now being used to heal and protect. Rick Stone's transportation networks had evolved from resistance logistics into the backbone of interstellar commerce, connecting previously isolated worlds and enabling trade relationships that benefited everyone involved. His shipping lanes were protected by joint defense forces that included former enemies working together. Interstellar commerce has expanded by 600% since the establishment of the Commonwealth, Rick reported. Former conflict zones are now thriving trade centers, and resource distribution has achieved optimal efficiency throughout all member systems. Colonel Ray Bennett had transformed his military resistance into the Commonwealth Defense Force, an integrated service that drew volunteers from 47 species. Their mission was not conquest or intimidation, but the protection of freedom and the prevention of future oppression. The Defense Force has successfully mediated 34 territorial disputes without casualties, Ray reported. Former military enemies are now serving together in joint units, sharing knowledge and resources to maintain galactic stability. The most remarkable aspect of the new military was its restraint. The Commonwealth possessed sufficient firepower to conquer any remaining opposition, but chose instead to demonstrate that strength could be used to protect rather than dominate. Alex Moore's communication networks had evolved into the foundation of participatory democracy, enabling representatives from remote worlds to participate in governance and ensuring that no voice was excluded from the decision-making process. Information flowed freely throughout the galaxy, ending the secrecy that had enabled corruption and abuse. Democratic participation rates now exceed 90% across all Commonwealth worlds, Alex reported. Transparent governance protocols have eliminated corruption and ensured that all policy decisions serve the common good rather than elite interests. But perhaps the most significant change was psychological rather than political. The galaxy had learned that cooperation was more powerful than domination, that diversity was a source of strength rather than weakness, and that justice was possible when beings chose to treat each other as equals. Maria Santos, now Director of Nutritional Services for the Commonwealth, had used her understanding of biochemistry to develop food production systems that could sustain any species. Her work had eliminated hunger throughout Commonwealth space and provided the foundation for population growth among previously declining species. Food security has been achieved for all Commonwealth citizens, Maria reported. Nutritional programs have been customized for the specific needs of each species, and agricultural production has reached sustainable levels that can support continued population growth. The memorial to Mining Station Omega-7 stood in the center of the Commonwealth capital, bearing the names of all who had died during the liberation, human and alien alike. The inscription was simple: they died so that others might live free. David Hall, now a senior engineer in the Commonwealth Infrastructure Division, visited his family's names on the memorial every year on the anniversary of their deaths. His father's sacrifice had not been in vain. Jim Hall had died trying to save people, and his death had catalyzed the movement that saved entire civilizations. The Commonwealth now includes 67 member species and continues to grow. Tom concluded his address. We are not perfect, and we continue to face challenges, but we face them together as equals. No being is considered expendable, no species is classified as inferior, and no one is forced to accept oppression as the natural order of existence. The applause that followed was not the formal acknowledgement of political theater, but the genuine appreciation of beings who had experienced both tyranny and freedom. Representatives from species that had been enemies for millennia stood together in recognition of what they had built from the ashes of the old order. In the months that followed the assembly, the Commonwealth continued to expand as isolated worlds learned about the new galactic civilization being built on principles of cooperation rather than domination. Former Council strongholds joined voluntarily, their populations eager to experience the prosperity and security that came with treating all beings as equals. The Turling homeworld, strip-mined and devastated by centuries of exploitation, was being restored through the combined efforts of 40 species working together. Advanced terraforming technology, previously hoarded by the Council elite, was being used to heal the environmental damage and create new habitats for the recovering Turling population. Our children will grow up free, announced Turling delegate Kira during a restoration ceremony. They will learn their traditional songs and stories, speak their ancestral language, and choose their own destinies. This is what the Commonwealth has given us. The Quillen Cultural Preservation Project had saved thousands of artifacts, languages, and traditions that the Council had tried to erase through forced assimilation programs. Quillen children now learned both their heritage and galactic science, becoming bridges between ancient wisdom and modern knowledge. Former Council species found their own renewal through the elimination of the oppressive systems that had corrupted their societies. Aldery artists created magnificent works celebrating cooperation and diversity. Krellin engineers designed cities that harmonized with natural environments rather than dominating them. Vrexian economists developed trade systems that benefited all participants rather than concentrating wealth among elites. The transformation was not without challenges. Some beings struggled to adapt to systems based on consent rather than coercion. Isolated pockets of resistance still clung to the old ways, believing that strength came only through domination of others. But these holdouts found themselves increasingly irrelevant as the rest of the galaxy moved forward together. Phil Carter, the janitor whose actions had triggered the liberation of the Council Assembly, now served as coordinator for Commonwealth infrastructure maintenance. His understanding of how systems worked had made him invaluable in building the networks that kept 67 civilizations functioning as a unified whole. Every job matters, Phil often told new workers. Every person has value. The Commonwealth exists because ordinary people chose to do extraordinary things when it mattered most. Lisa Webb had become the head of the Commonwealth Information Authority, ensuring that knowledge flowed freely while protecting individual privacy. The same networks that had once served the resistance now enabled transparent governance and educated citizenship throughout the galaxy. The children born after the liberation grew up in a galaxy where diversity was celebrated rather than feared, where cooperation was taught alongside competition, and where the idea that some beings were inherently superior to others seemed as primitive as believing the universe revolved around a single planet. Human schools throughout the Commonwealth taught the history of the liberation not as a triumph of one species over others, but as an example of what could be accomplished when ordinary beings refused to accept injustice as inevitable. The lesson was simple. Freedom was not a gift granted by the powerful, but a right claimed by the determined. Years passed and the galaxy continued to evolve. New species were discovered and welcomed into the Commonwealth as equals. Old enemies became trusted allies. Children who had never known oppression took their freedom for granted, which was exactly as it should be. Admiral Tom Rivers eventually retired from active service, but he remained an advisor to the Commonwealth leadership. On quiet evenings, he would sometimes visit the memorial to Mining Station Omega-7 and reflect on the journey that had brought them from despair to hope. The names carved in stone represented more than casualties of war. They were reminders of the cost of accepting oppression and the value of resisting it. Jim Hall and his family had died because the council valued profits over people. Their sacrifice had awakened a galaxy to the possibility that things could be different. The Commonwealth was not perfect. No civilization ever was. But it was built on the principle that every being deserved dignity, opportunity, and the right to determine their own destiny. It was a galaxy where strength was measured not by the ability to dominate others, but by the willingness to lift them up. And throughout the galaxy, on worlds where beings of dozens of species worked together in peace and prosperity, children learned the most important lesson humanity had taught the universe. No race would ever neglect the day the humans finally snapped, because that day had shown them all what they could become when they chose cooperation over conquest, justice over oppression, and hope over despair. The galaxy had learned that freedom was worth fighting for, and that no people, no matter how small or seemingly powerless, should ever be underestimated when they finally decided they had nothing left to lose except their chains.